Before you watch this video that will detail the effects of posterior pituitary gland hormones, make sure you watch the one that you see on the screen that is uploaded in Canvas that will talk about the stimuli for release of these pituitary gland hormones. So we're going to start by talking about the specific effects of oxytocin and ADH, both made in the hypothalamus but released from the posterior pituitary due to action potential. So there has to be a nerve signal from the hypothalamus that triggers the posterior pituitary to release those stored hormones. So we're going to look at the oxytocin first. Oxytocin is a hormone that has been researched quite a bit, and in a minute I'll show you this article that details some of oxytocin's effects as a feel-good hormone. So one of the things that oxytocin does is it stimulates contraction of smooth muscle in the uterus. So it has to bind to receptors on that smooth muscle, and then it stimulates either expulsion of the baby, so the birthing process, by those contractions getting stronger and stronger. As they get stronger, more oxytocin is released, so that's a positive feedback mechanism. Or during orgasm, the release of oxytocin actually stimulates contraction of the uterus, of that smooth muscle, in the opposite direction to help bring sperm to the fallopian tubes where fertilization of an ovum should happen, if it's going to happen. There are also some chemicals in male semen that will stimulate that effect as well. So one of the other effects is what's called the letdown reflex for milk ejection. That's the sort of layman's term for it. So it will stimulate, oxytocin will stimulate what are called myoid cells, MYOID. So they're muscle-like because they do contain some actin and some myosin, and those kind of help milk the mammary glands to release milk to the baby, as well as the suckling action of the baby. So the more a baby suckles, or when a baby cries, mom releases oxytocin to help let down milk. Right? That makes sense. After the baby's born, it's got to have some food. Mom is the best source of food, especially, our ancient selves out in the jungle. There's no place to go to buy formula. There's, nowhere else to get really milk from another organism. And our ancient ancestors definitely would have felt safer using their own milk as opposed to that of another organism. So oxytocin is pretty well known as what's called a feel-good hormone, and it is well documented that many of our mammal brethren also release oxytocin. So I'm going to show you a couple of interesting parts of this article on oxytocin, and notice it's almost 10 years old at this point. So one of them was right here, that in a study of 62 pregnant women, those that were releasing the highest levels of oxytocin in the first trimester and throughout that trimester were the ones that seemed to bond well with babies, bond well with their babies, and bonding well with the baby also stimulates brain growth for the baby as well as physical growth for the baby. This is also an interesting study as well that looked at the behaviors of male animals in relation to pups, and that with more oxytocin in their systems, they seem to be much more likely to go after, or to go, bond with, I should say, the babies, which helps to ensure the success of the baby. This part here is one of the most interesting parts, I thought, about this article, because I've been asked this question before. If oxytocin works so well to help us bond to other members of the tribe when we feel affection for them, meaning our ancient tribe, the people that are part of our group, the hunters, the gatherers, the baby makers, the people that are going to cook for us and keep us nurtured. If the more oxytocin we build with people, the stronger we feel bonded. And this was a study that was done about people that have autism or Asperger's on that spectrum to see if it could help them understand emotional cues a little bit better. And the evidence so far looks promising. From what I had read, this was a fairly small study, and I'm sure there are more recent ones out there that you could look at if you're interested. So now we'll look at antidiuretic hormone, ADH. So what's really nice about some of the hormones is if you look at what the word parts mean, it gives you at least a good general understanding of what that hormone is meant to do. So anti is against. The diure part here refers to urine. The tick just tells you it's an adjective. So antidiuretic hormone is a hormone that is against urination or prevents urination. It's released from the posterior pituitary because the hypothalamus, which is a thirst center and a hunger center for us, has osmoreceptors. Now, if you think about what the word osmoreceptor kind of sounds like, hopefully it sounds like osmosis, and I hope that will trigger you to think of water. So osmoreceptors are detecting, they're chemoreceptors that are detecting what the solute concentration is of body waters. So if that concentration is too high, which means the solute concentration is high, and the water concentration is lower than what it should be, then ADH is released. It might also be released in response to pain or very low blood pressure or even low blood pressure that you'll see in the RAS system, and some drugs as well, alcohol being one of them, because technically that is a drug. Sorry, I need to make a big correction there. Alcohol inhibits the release of ADH, which is why you urinate quite a bit when you drink alcohol. Right. So as far as functions of ADH and its target, the primary target is the kidney tubules, and we look more specifically at which parts of the kidney tubules later in the semester when we get to the urinary system. So now, when that ADH binds to the kidney tubules, it's going to increase the number of aquaporins. Right, so you can go back to chapter 3 to look at facilitated diffusion of water, which is done with aquaporins if you want to see a picture of those. But what that means is you can increase your water retention. So you reabsorb more water from what would have been urine. That's going to increase something called peripheral resistance, because the retention in water will often increase blood volume. So there's more resistance to the flow of blood. And because of that, the heart has to work harder, and thus we increase blood pressure. So one of the prime jobs of ADH is to increase blood pressure indirectly. That is not by acting on the heart, but acting on blood volume. The other way that we can increase water retention, blood volume, peripheral resistance, and blood pressure is that ADH triggers the kidneys to retain more urea, which is an osmotically active compound. So water is going to follow it. So the more urea we retain, the more water we retain as well. Sometimes you can see that in people who might have high BUN levels. So they have high levels of urea in the blood. It should never be 0, but let's say it's higher than normal. You may see edema in these people because they're holding on to more water. And that's, oftentimes due to lesser than optimal kidney function. One of the other things that ADH can do is related to its old name, which is vasopressin. Vaso refers to the blood vessels, and specifically we're talking about small arteries. Those are called arterioles. And I think of this one, the way I remember it is, I think of a round vessel, and if that round vessel is pressed closed, then it's going to take more force from the heart, or more small. It takes more force from the heart to push blood through there, which is another way of ADH increasing blood pressure. So if it binds to smooth muscle in those small blood vessels, it causes vasoconstriction, which means that the vessel gets smaller, the resistance to flow, the peripheral resistance, gets higher, and then blood pressure goes up. So as I corrected myself before, alcohol is an inhibitor of ADH release, as are some diuretics. Diuretics are medications that make you urinate. There's many different kinds. They have many different targets. ADH is just one of those targets.